Welcome to GoVMlab, India's first job-ready VMware learning platform where professionals meet experts to revolutionize their VMware careers.
The very first thing as a troubleshooter, vSphere troubleshooter, you should be knowing that what all the troubleshooting tools we are having it in our list actually. And we should be well aware about those troubleshooting tools because that has to be your starting point whenever you are trying to deal with vSphere issues. So in this particular section of this particular course, we are going to discuss about troubleshooting tools and let's understand it, what all the tools are available. So now the very first tool is our ESXi Shell. Okay. So if you remember when you're going to the deep dive program, I talk about something called DCUI, right? And DCUI is something which actually gives us direct access to our ESXi host console. Now, if you look at your Linux VM, right? Linux VM also has a shell interface where you run some commands and you interact with the kernel on the runtime. So in the ESXi, what if I want to interact with my ESXi kernel at the runtime and I want to fetch the system information? I want to fetch the exact information what is running on that ESXi host, right? And that's where if you want to get information about all of those things, that's where your ESXi shell becomes one of the very important aspect of troubleshooting. So ESXi shell is something you have to enable it. So by default, this service is disabled. Okay, so when you install your ESXi host, by default the service is disabled because no one wants these ESXi shell access to be opened by default. But because you want to do the troubleshooting, you need to log into your ESXi host. And when you want to log into your ESXi host, the shell has to be your very first data point or entry point to your ESXi host. And that's where you go to your ESXi host, go to that configure section, and that's where you will find under services section, you will find ESXi shell service and make sure you enable that service. Now, if you enable that service, you log into your DCUI console, which I will be showing you practically as well. That's where you will get access to your console. But sometimes what happens is that DCUI console doesn't take copy paste, or you can't, use the tab or maybe some shortcuts where you can simply paste that longer command and it get executed. And that's where it is highly recommended you enable the SSH service also on your ESXi host, because let's say you're accessing your server remotely. You are running your desktop on Windows operating system or some other operating system. You want to have a remote session getting established with your ESXi host, and that's where you can make use of secure shell protocol, right? It actually gives you a SSH connectivity to your Linux box or our ESXi host. And once you have this SSH connectivity and you have to enable this service running, and then basically you can get access to your Linux host directly over the network. You don't need to go to a server monitor and connecting that console cable and getting access to your DCUI console. So you can get the DCUI console, not the DCUI console, you can get the ESXi shell accessibility right there from your Windows system by having this SSH connectivity. Now, how do we go and do this SSH connectivity or ESXi shell? I'll tell you how do you go and do that. Okay, so this is one of the entry point for us to make sure that we go and enable these services. Now, the next, what do we have it is basically on the same ESXi shell. You might be seeing it something called timeouts, right? So your ESXi shell interactive timeout and your ESXi shell timeout. Now, what is this timeout? Because you also need to set some timeout, right? Let's say if some user is logged into your ESXi shell, you don't want to keep them logging in for 24 hours or 48 hours, even though that guy is not doing anything. You really want to define some timeout period where if the user if the user is not doing any activity, you want him to log out from that particular shell, right? And that's where basically your timeout will happen. So ESXi shell interactive timeout is basically when you go and actually log into your ESXi shell starting executing the commands. And this ESXi shell is more about your DCUI console, where if user is not doing anything on the DCUI console, it will actually go and timeout and log out the user from that particular session. So by default, it says that the value is 0. Now, what does that mean? By default, the value is 0 means there is no timeout. Okay, every user might log into environment for a longer duration, but obviously we really want to set some timeout for this particular parameter to make sure that you don't keep it open this shell or SSH access for a longer duration of time. Now, I think this is one of the well-known interface to you, which you might have learned in our DCUI program, in our deep dive program as well. So if you do see that, this is our DCUI console, right? Where all the services by defaults are disabled. So what happens is basically we go to troubleshooting options of our ESXi host, DCUI console. In that troubleshooting options, we have this option, enable ESXi Shell and enable SSH. So we need to go and enable these services to have a remote access to our ESXi Shell. But after that, we also have a modify ESXi Shell and SSH timeouts. Once you go to this particular view, it will prompt you to this particular slide. And that's where it talks about availability timeout and your ideal timeout. Now, what is availability timeout? If you do see that, it says that after the availability timeout expires, any running shell instances will remain, but new sessions will not be allowed. It means I have opened 10 sessions. Those will continue to run, but the 11th session, I won't be able to open it up. It changes to idle timeout will apply on next login, but will not affect any existing session. So idle timeout is something like, whenever you log out from your current session, right, and then you do the next login, that's where your idle timeout will come into the picture. I mean, this setting will come into effect, right? It doesn't come like immediately. Idle timeout means, let's say I set a timeout as a 5 minutes. It means next time when I log into this environment, this idle timeout setting will come into the picture. After 5 minutes, user is not doing anything on that console, I'm actually going to log out this guy. Okay, so that's where basically is all our idle timeout option. Now, before we go and start exploring this ESXCLI commands, because I would say if you want to be a troubleshooting expert, this is something you need to master it. Okay, because why am I enabling ESXi shell? Why am I enabling SSH to get access to my ESXi host? I mean, obviously, when I'm logging to my ESXi host, I want to do some kind of troubleshooting. I really want to execute some commands where I can get the real-time information about my network objects, storage objects, or maybe my VM objects and how these objects are working, right? So that's where once I enable ESXi shell SSH, the next thing for me to start executing the commands, the relevant commands about the issues, what we have found in our environment. Now, there is a specific namespaces. I mean, I'll tell you that, how these namespaces. So VMware has categorized all of these namespaces in that specific category. Now, how it happens is this is the command which you should be start getting your hands dirty with this ESXCLI command. Now, ESXCLI command has a different namespaces. Like first, every command, if you do see that, it starts with ESXCLI. But the next object, if you do see that, it talks about namespace. Now, when it talks about the namespace means you need to understand that there could not be a one master command giving you information about network, storage, or maybe virtual machine, or maybe some other stuffs, right? So you need to figure it out that what is the right command for me. So now basically, if you look at the next namespace, what it says that, let's say I want to get information very specific to my hardware. So that's where you have to use this particular notion, ESXCLI and the hardware. And then there would be a different namespaces which you need to figure it out that what is the right namespace for me. I would be showing you a couple of commands to get familiar with this ESXCLI interface. This is one of the very important interface for you to start doing the troubleshooting. For example, I want to do troubleshoot network specific issues. This is the namespace what you will be using it. I want to debug storage issues. This is the namespace what you would be interacting with it. I want to troubleshoot VM specific information. This is the namespace. So now if you do see that this ESXCLI, the command interface is actually designed in such a simplified way that it actually gives you a proper notation for running the commands, and it will make our life more simplified when we are executing these commands, because these commands are organized in a much more simplified and systematic way. Now, how do we go and interact with these commands? I'm going to show you as soon as we complete this particular section. If you have interest in learning VMware more in depth, not from an administration perspective, but from the architect or consulting perspective, then join our VMware vSphere Zero to Hero Data Center Expert program. This particular program has been highly rated by all of our learners. 100 plus careers have been transitioned successfully with our Zero to Hero Data Center Expert Deep Dive program with the 100% placement record. Now, what are the key highlights of this program? As you could see that it's India's first job-ready VMware learning program, which has a 70 hours of intense learning with the 80 plus hands-on labs, 40 plus scenarios would be presented to a learner as a challenge questions to assess their learning. We do have a mentors having a 15 years of experience and the certified professionals. You would be getting opportunity to have a one-on-one in-person doubt clarification session with the VMware mentor, and this particular zero to hero program will also preparing learners for a L3 or senior level profiles. Now we have transitioned many careers with our deep dive program, and you can see some of the feedbacks right here on your screen. These are the feedbacks what we have received from all of our successful learners who has transitioned their career with us. So what are you waiting for? If you want to become VMware expert or want to master this technology, then call us now today on the given number, or maybe drop us email on the provided email address. Thank you.